Hello! And I hope that you find me here at Knit Tea Live. Take two! Yes, we are trying the live stream again. Hopefully this time it works better. I don't know what is going on. I'm not exactly sure what's going on with this, because this is now the second live stream in a row where I have had to completely everything seemed fine. I go live, and then as I'm going live, the stream is having all sorts of problems, and I end up crashing and having to restart the whole thing again. And I kind of suspect there's a software issue going on. But I'm going to do a quick tweet to let everyone know that we're back. And again, as always, if you notice any problem, a video lag, I'm frozen, audio issues, please let me know. But we're gonna just, at this point, I'm gonna plow through and just do the live stream and hope for the best. Gonna hope for the best. But I'm gonna tweet out that the live stream has restarted. Gosh, you gotta laugh. You gotta laugh when these things happen. We started. Okay, so if you're rejoining, or you're joining back for the first time, or you're watching on the replay, welcome to Knit Tea Live. This week, I will once again do my quick disclosures, which is first, please give this a thumbs up. And also, because giving thumbs up, chatting with me, commenting, whether during the live stream or if you're watching on playback, commenting down in the comment section helps you to know that this is a space we're checking out. Also, in the description box, you will find my affiliate links. Affiliate links are, if you click on one and you do a little shopping at the site that you went to, I might then earn a small commission, and that helps support my channel. It helps support my website, knitswhereit'sat.com, which is home to the Fiber Indie list and Fiber Happenings. Fiber Happenings is the basis for the pattern spotlight that we will be doing later on the live stream. So that really is helpful to keep hopefully improving. I am trying to create a better experience for everybody on my channel. Not being so successful with it lately, but I'm going to keep trying. And thank you for keep coming back. For those of you who keep coming back to watch Knit Tea Live. Okay, so this week we're going to be talking about pattern writing, namely looking at some not great examples of well-written patterns, badly written patterns. I'm going to just say it. As we go on this discussion, and this is something I forgot to say in the original live stream that I'm going to say now. I'm going to be showing some examples of some less than ideal pattern writing that I did find on the intertubes. I'm not going to name any of the people who wrote the patterns. I don't want to embarrass or shame individual people, but it's more to kind of illustrate some surprisingly common errors that are made in pattern writing and these free patterns that you find. And I gotta say, the reason I wanted to do this is, again, okay, quit. I don't know why that even came up, but the reason I even decided to do this was because, you know, the internet, the great thing about the internet is it's very democratizing. Is that the right word? But it's definitely a place where it's an open space, and it has, in terms of the craft world, has opened up the possibility for so many people to share their original ideas and to create small businesses around their crafting, and namely an explosion of independent knit and crochet designers. And I think overall that has been fantastic. However, because anybody can put a pattern up on the interweb, that means there's a lot of not great patterns out there, not well-written patterns out there. And the issue I think that is with this, patterns that people write up that probably haven't been test knitted, probably not tech edited, definitely not tech edited. I'm going to show you some examples and you're going to see this was not tech edited. But the problem that happens with that is you get newer knitters, less experienced knitters. A lot of times you're looking for free patterns when you first start off, and what starts to happen is people get put off from the craft or certain aspects of the craft, like charts. It's like, oh, charts are so confusing, they never make sense. And charts are not for everybody. Not everybody's brain processes information the same way. And for some people, charts are never going to work well for them. And that is a totally legitimate experience. A chart is a tool, and not all tools work for all people. But there are people who give up on charts because they have incorrect charts that aren't helping them with their knitting. And I'm going to show you a specific example of this. And I think it's something we should be talking about more, which is, I think there is something in terms of the opening up the pattern writing to amateurs. And I mean this in a respectful way. I mean amateur in the like kind of original, traditional way of an amateur, with someone who just has the love of something, as opposed to a professional who gets paid to do something. Although there's some not great paid patterns out there too. But I just wanted to kind of talk about that a bit and show some examples of what I think are beyond just math errors and the common errors that can happen in any pattern, even if it's fully test edited, even if it's fully test knitted or crocheted, even if it's fully tech edited. You know, there's still errors that come into the pattern. There's still stitch counts that might get just entered into incorrectly, and a errata page has to exist for that pattern, or an updated pattern has to be released. Those things happen under the most perfect of circumstances. But there are a lot of patterns out on the internet for free that have never been tech edited, have never been test knitted. And frankly, I think it doesn't help the craft as a whole. So again, I'm in this conversation, I don't want to shame anybody, but I think it's worth talking about what are sort of the common mistakes that we are finding in patterns. And there's one that I just saw over and over again. And as we're talking about this, I would love to hear about your experiences with patterns, free patterns that you've found on the internet, ones that have been well written and ones that have been badly written. Like, what is the worst really? That's not even close to how that should be written out. Or just something that was a pattern that you came across where you were like, it was almost unworkable because the instructions just didn't make sense. Things like that. I'd love to hear your stories as we have this conversation about pattern writing and not great examples of it. So we'll have that conversation, and then afterwards we'll have our pattern spotlight. It's going to be a big one today. There were a number of new pattern releases, and I have 2 new people who are on the Fiber Indie list, so I wanted to show off a little bit of their work. So we got a big pattern spotlight today as well. So let's get started. Let me get to, here we go. And I just got to make sure that I have this set up correctly. So what started this thought process for me in terms of pattern writing and things that can go wrong. I just gotta make sure everything. Oh, jeez. Okay. Okay. There was one thing. I was on one of my knitting Facebook groups, as sometimes you are, and somebody came on going, I have this pattern, I'm so confused by the chart, I forget how to read charts. Pretty common question. And then I saw the chart. And I'm about to bring it up on the screen. But before I do, to give some context, the chart was for a sock. It was a sock pattern. And a sock that is knitted in the round. And I did tweet out, what is the problem with this chart written, for a pattern in the round? And here it is. And can you, right now, tell me I know what the problem with the chart is, but do you know what the problem with the chart is? Now, some people, when I tweeted this chart out, they did come back and they were like, well, I really dislike the hash marks being used to symbolize the knit stitches. I want to just transition that over there. Oh, that's fine. Sorry, I might just shrink my camera just a little bit. There we go. Now, there were people who complained about this chart because they used the horizontal dash line to as a symbol for knit stitches, which that's not, to me, a mistake. That is just a matter of personal preference. Some people, it is more common with charts to simply have a blank box as opposed to a black box, a blank white box to represent knit stitches. But there are charting conventions that uses this straight vertical line to represent the knit stitch. That's a matter of personal preference. Personally, I don't prefer the vertical line, but that's not a mistake. That's just a personal preference. But there's a legit mistake, and I try to be kind about it in my tweet, but Kate Atherley, who is a knit designer and tech editor, was immediately like, oh no, that's a major error. I'm like, well, trying to be kind, Kate. But yes, it is an error. But yeah, so the mistake is, if you notice here on the numbering, over here on the right side of the chart, it's numbered 1, 3, 5, 7. You have the odd numbers. And on the left side of the chart, you have the even number rows numbered. This is how you number the rows for a chart written for a piece knitted flat, where you're turning the work and knitting back. And if you want to understand why that numbering system exists, I do have a video on that you can check out after the live stream. I will put a link for that video down in the description box when we're done here. For knitting in the round, however, you never turn the work. Well, I shouldn't say. There are circumstances where you knit in the round and you might turn your work, but that's pretty rare. Generally, knitting in the round, you are only going to be knitting all the time with the right side facing you. So for charts written for patterns in the round, all the numbers should be to the right side of the work. And that is to let the knitter know that they're never going to turn the work. There's also the issue I have, and again, I don't know if this is so much an error with this chart as so much, again, a personal preference, but the numbering for the columns of stitches is at the top. Usually for charts, you put them down at the bottom. And the reason you put the numbers down at the bottom is because you read charts from the bottom up, because we always knit from the bottom up. The work grows kind of that way, where you're always knitting one row of knitting on top of the other. So there's just a lot of things about this chart that is maybe less than ideal, but there's also things about the chart that's just wrong, namely the numbering. And what bothered me so much about this chart situation is the fact that this is the type of thing that can put a knitter off of charts who might otherwise handle them very well. And it's because the chart is actually telling them to knit flat for a pattern that you knit in the round. Now, if you're an experienced knitter, you would look at the chart and you immediately know, I'm knitting a sock. Obviously, I'm not turning the work. It's knitted in the round. I can just ignore that. But for less experienced knitters, a lot of times when they see a pattern and the pattern is telling them to do something, they don't necessarily trust that they are correct and the pattern is wrong, because the assumption is always that the person who wrote the pattern knows more about knitting than you do. And what happens so often with patterns like this, free patterns, is that it turns out the person who wrote the pattern doesn't know more about knitting than you, and in fact may know less than you realize. What was interesting about, again, I'm not going to name the person or the place that the pattern came from, but I will say it was from a company, a yarny company that it was put out by. And that was even a little more shocking to me in some ways, because they like, if you're in the industry in any way, you should know basics of how, like, charting conventions. And there were other issues with the pattern as well. It didn't give a gauge. It didn't give any stitch gauge to the pattern. It did give some very good detail in terms of the yarn that it was used to make the sock that it was using. And then gave some information, just did say, like, if you choose to use a lighter weight yarn, you're going to get a smaller sock. But he didn't give a gauge. There were some other issues with it. I'm trying to remember now off the top of my head. Let's see, I'm not going to do that. So yeah, but the chart was the one that was really like, yeah, no, that's just wrong. And I gotta say, I was shocked a little bit how many patterns I came across. Everything I'm going to be showing of examples is actually going to be for in the round knitting, because a common error that I saw over and over again with patterns written in the round was how the rounds were labeled. Bear. I've had the trouble too when finding mistakes in patterns. I tend to assume that I'm not understanding or doing something wrong. Yeah, and that is I'm the same way. I sit there and I'm like, I must be doing something wrong. Because, like, obviously someone who writes a pattern must know quite a bit about knitting. And then a lot of times you come to find out, no, in fact, Bear, you and I had this experience together. Because Bear was, I did a knit along with a pattern that I wrote. This is why I'm very sympathetic. I wrote a pattern for my glove, my Mira glove, which I don't have nearby, and I knew it was never tech edited, it was never test knitted. I knew there were probably going to be errors in it, but I was like, I had shown it off, so people were interested in, like, trying to do a knit along with it. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll give you the pattern, but you know what you're getting into. And Bear was finding all sorts of mistakes that I made. And I was like, nope, I made a mistake. That was on me. But I believe I numbered my chart correctly. I hope so. I hope I did, consider I'm calling that out right now. So next, we're going to take a look at, I'm going to turn that off, going to get this set up, is this pattern that I came across for a leg warmer. And actually, it's a leg warmer. It's a pretty straightforward pattern, but there were some interesting things about how the pattern was written. Some of these may not be mistakes necessarily, but maybe less than ideal. I'm going to just start with something really simple from it, which was the materials list. What I found so interesting about this materials list was, the worsted weight. Yeah, that's fine. Then it got down here to needles. Like, the needle says worsted weight for needles, US 7. I found that odd because, and maybe the pattern, like, maybe in other countries, this might be my lack of knowledge about how knitting is conveyed in other countries. Maybe in other countries, other parts of the world, when you talk about needles, you talk about them in addition to the weight of yarn that you would normally use with that size of needle. But that's, like, needle sizes are needle sizes, and yes, there are definitely needle sizes that you typically would use for worsted weighted yarn. Normally the needle size that you use for that is between like a 7 to a 9. Tends to be the needle size that gets you a gauge that's appropriate for that yarn. But it was an unusual thing to write down next to the needle size, which was worsted weighted, because it gives the impression that that's a naming convention with needles. And maybe it is somewhere in the world and I just am not aware of it. I just thought that was unusual. But that's not a sign of that it was bad or not bad. But this was more my issue. Is, again, it was a pattern. Now I'm doing it off the top of my head. I had to restart my computer, so I don't have all the documents up the way I did before. But the pattern didn't give a gauge, which, look, okay, there are some patterns where gauge is not essential. But when you're talking about like something like a leg warmer, which is actually a fitted item, it's good to have a gauge written down on your pattern. But the other thing was the pattern didn't give any abbreviation definitions. There was no abbreviation definitions that came up. Thank you, Bear. But this was the pattern that was written. This was the stitch pattern. And it's perfectly fine in and of itself, but on round 3, this was a cable pattern. It just says C2B, which means basically cable to back, which is a right-leaning cable cross, where it actually involves 4 stitches. That's the other thing that's weird about this now that I think about it. Sorry, I'm like, wait a minute, is that right? Was it just a single stitch cable cross? It may have been, although I don't recall that being what it looked like when I saw the pattern. Regardless, C2B, so it's 2 stitches, and no, that's such a weird, so you're going to take 1 stitch off, you're going to take that 1 stitch, you're going to move it to the back of the work, you're going to knit the 2nd stitch, and then the stitch that's on your cable needle, or to the back of the work, then you're going to knit it. So it's a 2-stitch cable cross, and it's right-leaning. The pattern, however, did not give a definition for that abbreviation. Now, if you're familiar with knitting cables, you're going to be able to decipher what C2B stands for. But if you're not familiar with, or as familiar with cable knitting, you might be a bit flummoxed, but what does C2B mean? And that's why the convention is on knitting patterns that it provides a key to the abbreviations that are being used in that pattern. And it's funny because so often I'm like K, knit. Do we really need to tell knitters that? But I also understand, like, well, you put that down because you're going to put down all your abbreviations, so write that one out as well. But it's just like, it was one of those things where it's like, here's someone who wrote a pattern for something they're very proud of, but they don't know what all the knitting conventions are, the pattern writing conventions are. And that means somebody who maybe comes across it is going to look at that pattern and just be confused and not like, oh. And then again, their confidence goes down. Claire, was this a vintage pattern? I tend to find they have less spoon feeding, more assumptions that readers were able to take what they needed from a brief instruction. No. That's a great point, Claire. And no, that in that case, I do not believe that was a vintage pattern. If it was a vintage pattern, there was no indication from the person who put it up on the web that it was a vintage pattern. Now, maybe they're used to utilizing vintage patterns. And, it's interesting that you bring that up, Claire, too, because I am someone who tends to think it's gotten a little out of control how much knitters and crocheters are expecting designers to put into their patterns. Like, it's almost like becoming where designers are being expected to provide a reference book along with the pattern, and that's kind of out of control, you know. like, like if a designer is using a particular cast on technique, for example, for their pattern, I'm not sure it's always necessary that they give a full explanation on how to do that. I think it's helpful maybe to provide some references, like here's a good place you can go to learn about how to use this cast on. I think that would be great. But I think we're putting a lot on designers these days to provide in-depth detail on every possible new technique that might be appearing in their pattern, and still expecting that pattern to be like less than $5. like, you know, like I think that's a little much to be asking people, especially for the prices. Like, knitting patterns are way, way, way undervalued in the industry. They really are. We do not pay as crafters the full value of a pattern. We don't. Not on any stretch of the imagination. And then on top of it, independent designers feeling like they're being expected to provide like instructions on how to do like every single technique that is going to appear in that. It's like too much. But that being said, I do think that when you're going to be using abbreviations for a pattern, there's a reason why it's really helpful to have an abbreviation key. Just to say, like, that's CB2 means this. There were other issues with that pattern, though, in terms of how it was written. I'm going to show you this one real quick. I just got to bring it up. And it had to do with the way the shaping was written, Claire. But if they don't put enough, they get this email. Yes, I agree. If they don't, that's the complete bind that designers are in these days, right? If they don't provide like practically a reference manual along with their pattern, they get emails from the crafter either asking, well, how do I do this? Or complaining, why didn't you give me this information? And I will say, I do think it is on us as the makers to do our research and go, like, that's the other great thing about the internet these days. I mean, when I started knitting, oh my gosh, if I didn't know how to do something, I either had to find a book that would tell me how to, like, teach me how to do it, or I'd go to Stitch and Bitch with other knitters, and they would tell me how to do it. And hopefully I was coming across someone who really knew how to do it well, But now on the internet, there's so much great information these days on the internet. It's like, we can figure some of this out. We can find the right video, Like, we shouldn't be asking designers to handhold us through knitting their entire pattern. I think it's an unreasonable expectation. Bear, I appreciate stitch counts after complicated parts in a pattern, but don't expect it. I found lots of vintage patterns that don't have any. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I do think I like to have a stitch count. Especially, I mean, look, if there's been a lot of shaping and a lot of increasing, I want to have a stitch count at the end of it so that I know that I increased the correct number of stitches. Speaking of, the same leg warmer pattern. This is what came up for the shaping, and for it goes up across the calf. And so all it says for increasing at the calf is to increase 1 stitch for each purl section. So I did the math in my head. It did, for the lowest sizing, there were 13 pattern repeats. There were 13 pattern repeats. There we go. So that meant there were 13 purl sections, which means that you would increase 13 stitches. So then I could add that to the original stitch count, and I would know what the stitch count is. So can I do the math and figure it out? Absolutely. Is that easy necessarily for newer, less experienced knitters to figure out? No, it's not. And I think that's the kind of information where it's like, yeah, vintage patterns. I sit there and I'm like, I'm glad that I wasn't a knitter then. Like, spoon feed me a little bit. Just a little bit. Just spoon feed me a little bit. But this was the weird thing, too, about this pattern. in terms of the shaping, so the increase was fairly clear in terms of what to do. But then you got to the end of the calf section and you were going to go back into the ribbing to finish this leg warmer. And all it says is, end on the fourth round of pattern. On the next row, by the way, this was a common thing I was seeing for these patterns that were in the round, is they were calling rounds rows. I will get into that. Decrease 1 stitch for the knit 2, purl 2 ribbing. And then continue in the ribbing for 12 rows. Here was my confusion around that. The pattern called to increase 13 stitches for the smallest size, because you were doing an increase in each purl section. So was it just wanting you to decrease away one of those purls? And then how does that work then with the ribbing matching up with the rest of the pattern? Because when you increase that 1 stitch in each of the purls, you now have a pattern that was basically based on a 2x2 ribbing, now becoming a 2x3 ribbing. So 2 knit stitches and 3 purls. If I only decrease 1, that means I'm going to have 1 section with 2 purls. That means that, and then I start knitting a 2x2 rib. How everything lines up isn't going to quite match. So it was something where I was just looking at going, that's just a little bit of a, am I misreading the direction? Where you really are only decreasing away 1 stitch? And so the pattern is just a little like, in that area? Or were you supposed to decrease away more stitches? I don't know. But I just thought it was a less than ideal way of writing out that shaping, or even designing that shaping, frankly. So, one more example, that pattern, and this was something so common that I saw in patterns that were written in the round, and I'm going to just say right up front, I often, almost all the time, when I talk about knitting in the round, misspeak and say row instead of round. That's a very common thing, a very understandable thing to be doing when you're talking about knitting, because when you knit flat, you knit rows, and when you knit in the round, you're knitting rounds of knitting. Like, this is a knitting convention. Because technically, when you knit in the round, it's one big row spiraling on top of each other, you know? Like, that's one of the things about knitting in the round. It's not one row. Anyway, every pattern that I looked at for today's live stream called around a row. Now, it's one thing for me to misspeak, and I know that I'm misspeaking, and I try to correct myself, and it's just, this is a lifelong thing. It's another to write it incorrectly in a pattern. Because again, you're trying to communicate things to us, the maker. And if I'm knitting something in the round and it says rows, it can become an area of confusion, especially if you've written your chart as though you're knitting flat. Then it can get real confusing, because it's like, I know, because on the cast on direction it says to join in the round, and I'm knitting a sock. So I know, and you can knit socks flat, that you can do that, but this is clearly a sock that is being knitted in the round. And yet everything, naming the rounds, rows, the chart, is indicating that it's something being knitted flat. And it speaks to someone not experienced with pattern writing. But this I thought was a doozy. And the reason I'm not going to say, that's not the one I want. Sorry, I'm trying to get to it. This is it. Okay. This actually upset me. A lot of things I'm like, oh, okay, they're not an experienced designer. You know, they were just putting something together that was fun to put up on the web. They're an amateur in the positive sense of the word. And I understand as an amateur designer myself how, you know, those things can happen. But this one was real head scratcher for me. This was for a hat knitted in the round. Can you point Can you pick up on what is wonky here? 1, right side, knit whole row. 2, in parentheses, wrong side, knit 1, yarn round needle, knit 2 together. Yarn round needle? I think that's supposed to be a yarn over. I think that's supposed to be a direction for a yarn over. Knit 2 together, repeat bracketed. Wrong side. Yes, Claire, exactly. Wrong side. And the whole pattern does this, where it names the even rows as a wrong side. What? 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 This. You don't turn your work when you're knitting in the round. So there's no wrong side rows. Like there is when it's flat. Right? Claire, if it's a wrong side, am I knitting or purling? Exactly. Well, and of course, it's not a wrong side row because you are knitting in the round. And I read the pattern over and over again going, am I reading this wrong? Is this actually, do you start knitting in the round and then start knitting flat? Because that happens. Like sock knitting, if you're doing a flap and gusset, you knit the leg, or depending on what direction you're knitting, but let's say cuff down. Cuff down sock, you knit to the point, and then you get to the heel flap, and on half the stitches thereabouts, you knit flat back and forth until you're done with the flap, and then you join everything back in the round and do your magic. But no, I saw no indication on this pattern. None. That you somehow, somewhere start knitting flat. Every round has that denotes wrong side for an even row round. And what upset me about this was, 1, I looked through the person's website and they had a pattern up on Instructables and are supposedly a knitting teacher. That just upset me. I am somebody who, yes, I do tutorials and I spat off what my knitting opinions, tips, tricks, opinions, everything, preferences, my whole spiel at the beginning of my upload videos. I don't even go so far as to call myself like a guru or a tutor or a teacher, but if you're going to use those words to describe yourself and where you exist in the fiberverse, you should be able to know that there's no labeling a wrong side row when you're knitting in the red. That made me mad. That literally made me mad. Yes, Bear, the yarn over thing was odd as well. I agree. But then I'm like, well, I don't know where this person is from. Maybe they're, English isn't their first language, translation. Like, you never know. But that was an odd wording. I totally agree. Claire, it's a 2-row pattern repeat. I think they've tried to break it down, but that could confuse. Yes, it is a 2-row pattern repeat. That sounds like the oldest knitting manuals. Okay, Mike. Oh, hello. Welcome. I haven't seen your name before. That sounds like the oldest knitting manuals on archive. They say stuff like put yarn around needle instead of yarn over. They also call knit plain and purl. Yeah, and that's true. And I think there is something to that. Like Claire even pointed out with the one example I showed where the abbreviation was never defined, you could be having people who are very used to reading more vintage patterns. I've also read where patterns in Europe oftentimes don't have as much explanation as what we're maybe used to here in the United States, North America. And that's totally legitimate, which is like with the abbreviation thing, I'm just like, well, that could just be a difference in convention, but it's one that bothered me because I found that there were other issues in the pattern as well. like calling rows rounds. But again, I was like, maybe the person's from another country. Translation. But I think what bothered but that last one really got under my skin. It did. I admit it. I totally admit it. And again, not going to say who put it out there, who did that pattern, because, you know, I don't want to embarrass anybody necessarily. But I also feel like if we don't, like, we need to start having these conversations because I do feel like poorly written patterns that just have flat out mistakes, like that chart that was written out for flat knitting when it was a pattern in the round. I mean, that's just a mistake. Like, that's just a mistake. And what happens is, for people who are less experienced, who are new to the craft, is they start losing confidence, they get put off, and it is a skill. This is one of those skills that you have to start to develop as a knitter, as a crocheter, as a maker. All my examples are knitting because that's what I'm more familiar with, so I'm better at kind of being able to evaluate a pattern and go, wait, that's not right. But it is a skill that we do have to develop as makers to be able to evaluate the quality of the pattern that we're looking at and understand what gaps we're going to have to fill in and how to fill in that information. And there is, you know, a part of this that's on us to be more knowledgeable knitters. But at the same time, there's a lot of not great free patterns out on the internet. There are a lot of not well-written ones that have never been tech edited. I asked on Twitter yesterday, like, what were some examples of, like, bad pattern writing that people have found? And one that was really like, ooh, was the person said that the pattern was calling for a seed stitch border, but the pattern was written for 1x1 ribbing. That's not a miscalculation. That is not a typo. That is just not writing your pattern correctly. So, oh my god. But yeah, I mean, there was definitely some old-fashioned wording in that one example. I didn't even pick that up until I was just reading it on screen. But there's all sorts of like yarn overs. I'm very used to just saying YO and, you know, to do the yarn over, but I know, like, an older way of writing it is to, like, bring yarn forward and actually have the pattern describe the actual action of creating the yarn over. So, you know, there's some things that are a matter of just different conventions in different parts of the world, and this is something too. We all have access now to so much from different parts of the world, and sometimes you come across something and you're like, oh. Like, for example, the words knit and crochet. You see this all the time. These conversations come up where it's like, oh, look at this crochet, and you're like, that's knitting. And it's annoying when you're a knitter and somebody's like, look at this knit pattern, and you're like, that's crochet. But there are parts of the world where knit and crochet are actually used interchangeably, where they call knit crochet or they call crochet knit. I'm not sure exactly what. So sometimes what you're just dealing with is a difference in naming conventions and translations in different parts of the world. And so you kind of have to sometimes be forgiving of that and not even forgiving. It's not about forgiving, because people in other parts of the world are allowed to call and do things their own way. It's more of being cognizant and respectful of that and going, okay, didn't know that. Good to know. So yeah, that's kind of all of my examples that I came up with in like an hour search yesterday of looking for like, what are some not great written patterns on the internet? I would love to hear your thoughts on whether or not it's been good for the crafting community to have so many patterns available for free that may not be written all that well. Is it hurtful to the community? Is it not hurtful to the community? Can it hold people back? I'd love to hear your opinions. My feeling is a lot of times for newer knitters, it can be demoralizing. That's my concern. That's my biggest concern. Where it's like, sometimes it is you. Sometimes you just don't have the knowledge that you need, and you need to go out and learn it. And sometimes it's the pattern. And when you're a newer knitter or less experienced or crocheter or whatever craft it is, it's sometimes hard to know. Is it me or is it the pattern? Is it the instructions? So anyway, I think that's it. We are going to go into pattern spotlight now. Woo! And yeah, I'm really excited for this week's pattern spotlight. If you would like to know the truth. I want to make sure that I have everything set up though. Because I've got to turn off, we'll start there. I've got to turn off my, I got to change a function in my software so I don't crash the stream. Little BTS for you behind the scenes. I am looking at trying to use a different software for my live streams. That might be a little like more straightforward for me. I could do more anyway, but I'm not ready. I'm not ready to make the switch yet. So, okay, I got that. Here we go. Okay, we're going to desktop share. Why is you not showing up? Shoot. Okay, I'm gonna come back here. Oh man. Did I? Oh, I know the mistake that I made. Oh, darn it. I know. Oh. Okay. All right, I'll go back into this. Sorry, I realized that I forgot to set something up before I came back on, and I'm going to try to get this set up during the live stream. We'll see if this screws up everything. Okay, it didn't. So far, so good. I'm going to come here. Okay. Oh, woo! Yay, I'm so excited. I hope everything's working okay on your end. But, oh, I think you're right about new peeps. They're usually not in the situation that they can fill in the blanks or work it out from context exactly. And, oops. No, I do not need to subscribe to my own email list. If you'd like to subscribe to my email list, you always can. If you haven't already, and I do have a free pattern. Hopefully it's well written. I very rarely send stuff out, but every once in a while I send an announcement or something out. Anyway, so first we are going to do pattern spotlight, and the first new pattern of the week is from A Bee in the Bonnet. A Bee in the Bonnet. Gosh, I can't speak right now. This is her new sock pattern. This is the Amicus sock. I am not going to say what I always say about Lauren Rad is the designer behind A Bee in the Bonnet. I'm not going to say my normal thing that I say about her work, even though it's totally true that she manages to combine like textured stitches and lace beautifully, and this is another amazing example of it. And I'm going to come over here to her Etsy store. It's loading. Sorry that you have to watch that. Oh, geez, go away. So much stuff. But zoom in. But this is a lacy cabled sock. There we go. We can see it better now. So it has these columns of cables. That looks like a 4x4 left cross with columns of this eyelet pattern. This is just lovely. It features a flap and gusset heel construction. And yeah, it's another beautiful sock. This year, Lauren, all of her pattern designs are being named like after words about like friendship and caring and comfort, and it's just really lovely. And as I always say with Lauren, sorry, I got something in my teeth. There we go. As I always say with Lauren, and I will always say this, you should totally follow her on Instagram and or Twitter because her photos are just gorgeous. I mean, like, and her aesthetic, it is very Victorian, rose garden aesthetic, and she has beautiful roses as well. But yeah, her photos, I mean, I just sometimes I'm like, I just need a moment to relax and feel comfort and like just at ease, and you know, all of that, and I just look at her photos. And her patterns are gorgeous too. So this is the new pattern from Lauren. Rad. Just really lovely pair of socks. We're gonna come back down here. And next, this is a new, this is kind of a new pattern. It's actually a pattern set from Kath Andrews Designs. This is the little Orme collection. Oh, I have a typo. Shoot. I will have to fix that. Close that. This is a collection, a hat, fingerless glove, and cowl collection. It's a Fair Isle pattern, which in her words is inspired by seeing Lynchen on the side of a cliff, which is just lovely. And this pattern set was first available on Knit Picks. She now has it for sale on her PayHip store. And you can see the crown of the hat here. This is just really gorgeous Fair Isle pattern work here. Just love it. And again, I keep saying, because it's true, this is the year of color work, I swear. So many, I'm just seeing so many patterns so far this year featuring Fair Isle, featuring stranded color work. No, they're not the same thing technically. All Fair Isle is stranded color work, but not all stranded color work is Fair Isle. Fair Isle is a particular technique from the Fair Isles. But anyway, Shetland Islands, but I digress. But yeah, this is gorgeous. You can get the entire pattern set, have a gorgeous matching. I love the colors too. Obviously, you can choose any colors you want for a set like this. These colors speak to me. Because green, oh my gosh, I didn't even see that photo. Oh, this is such a great example of how mixing up the dominant color in a pattern totally can change, even though it's the same motif. It changes what's in the foreground and what's in the background, and therefore it changes what that motif ends up looking like, and that's just stunning. Oh, stunning. Bear, I think it's a bit of a double-edged, oh, yeah. Sorry. Bear is just commenting that I think it's a bit of a double-edged blade. Switch over here. With the volume of patterns out there, but it has been frustrating to get halfway through a pattern and not be able to finish because it doesn't make sense. Yeah, that is a very frustrating experience. I will say there are a number of knitting groups on Facebook that have really, like, where people will post, like, can you help me with this? And a lot of people jump in to try to help. Sometimes too many. Sometimes too many. Sometimes people sometimes you get not the greatest information. But there's a lot of help that's sort of out there that, but yes, it is very frustrating to get to a part of the pattern and you're just like, I don't know what to make of this. This is really hard to read through. There's one pattern that I read through that I didn't end up screenshotting because frankly, I couldn't quite. I have the gist, I think, of what the pattern was trying to do, but it was like, I'm not even sure the pattern was poorly written. It was just an odd construction. And so I was like, oh, I'm not going to bring up this example. But yeah, it is frustrating. It is very frustrating when you're just sitting there going, I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss. And I think it's just could be so demoralizing. But let's go back to the pattern. Spotlight. There it is. So yeah, here you can see all 3 items that are available in this collection. I just love this. I love stranded color work. I love it so much. We're going to come back here, close that window. And we're going to scroll down to next. We have a new pattern from Hunter's Hemmersman of Pantsville Press. And this is her slouch hat. It's called the pliquet. Okay, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, so please forgive me if I'm not. Is it pliquet? Plicat? Plicat? I don't know. But this is a beanie, and what inspired Hunter, according to her website, what inspired the design of this hat is she really loves slouchy hats, but sometimes gets frustrated trying to get the slouch of the hat just right. So she designed this using a technique that basically once you get the slouch that you want in it, you do something. I don't know what the magic is, but you do something
that sets the slouch forever. So you always have the perfect slouch to your hat. And yeah, this is a lovely hat. It has these elongated stitches along the side. Of course, if you don't want to set your slouch, if you want your slouch to fly free, you don't have to do the technique, and you can just have this lovely hat pattern. So oh, sorry, I'm going to back up. This has the swirl crown to it, which I don't always love when crowns of hats have the swirl. The swirl is created by doing the decreases just in one direction. So you only use, in this case, it looks like it's leaning to the right. So right leaning decreases. You only do one decrease slant, and that creates the swirl, as opposed to doing mirror decreases, which creates a straight line in the crown of the hat. But I really like the swirl on this hat because it's a more elegant swirl than sometimes you find. And it matches up beautifully with the stitch patterning, can't talk in a moment, that she has here, where she starts this rib, and the way she decreases that rib away is so freaking cool. Like, it's just that is so cool, the way she did that. And the way this decrease line slants from the brim pretty much all the way up the hat. It's a really elegant design feature that is something I love in knitting, which is when you have like just simply stunning. That's what I call it. It's simply stunning, meaning it's actually a really simple, straightforward technique that almost any knitter should be able to do, but you get this result that makes other people who don't know the magic of knitting go, oh my god, you made that? And you just think, yeah, it's really not that complicated. That's how you want to feel at the end of a pattern. I always feel like that's how you want to feel when you're finished with the pattern. Like, I did that. And yeah. So yeah, it's really pretty. It's a very cool hat. And her work is very neat. That was another, I'm not going to get into it today. Sorry. There was another conversation. One thing, sorry, clicked on the wrong thing. Something to know about Hunter and her patterns. She never gives a needle size. She gives gauge and the yarn recommendation, but she never lists a needle size in her patterns. And I think I understand why. And her logic is not wrong. I don't know if I agree, but it's not wrong. That, at the end of the day, she doesn't feel she can really recommend a needle size, because what needle size a knitter needs to use to achieve a gauge is highly personal, which it is. And a lot of knitters, sorry, my nose is itching. A lot of knitters, especially new knitters, are unaware that needle size that's given in a pattern is a jumping off point. It's a place to start. And you gotta do your gauge swatch, or knit the project and cross your fingers. And if it's not the right needle size for you, then you've got to try another needle size. And after time and experience, you start to learn when you have to go, okay, that's suggesting a size 7. I'm a looser knitter, so I'm going to go to a size 6. That's me. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. And that's something else. A lot of times knitters, they think that, especially younger knitters, newer knitters, think that if they are needing to go up or down a needle size, they're not knitting correctly. And it's like, no, you're knitting fine. If your tension is consistent and you're not in pain and you're enjoying what you're doing just great. Tension that you knit at is highly personal to how you knit. So you use the needle you need to use to get to gauge. You don't try to get to gauge by using a particular needle. So anyway, but I think that's an interesting choice that Hunter makes, not to put needle sizes on her patterns. Whitney, I missed who did this pattern. Sorry, who is the designer again? It's Hunter Hemmersman. It's Pantsville Press. And of course, you can find all of these on Fiber Happenings at knitswhereit'sat.com. By the way, Fiber Happenings used to exist on the main page for the Fiber Indie list on my website. Now Fiber Happenings has its own page, so it's going to be easier to find than ever. And of course, after the thing is over, I will get a link
No, well, I don't know what's going to be in the description box right now because I had to restart the live stream. All right, so desktop share.
We're going to go back to this, and we're going to go to our next pattern. There's so many patterns this week. And this is from that Metzbauer girl. This is her Minnesota sock. That Metzbauer girl has been doing a series of socks based on the 50 states. And she's at Minnesota right now. I don't know how many states she's gotten through. And this is like, in some ways I think is her most fun pattern of these. If you don't know, Minnesota is the state of 10,000 lakes. A lot of lakes in Minnesota. But she designed this sock with the duck because there's the children's game, you know, duck, duck, goose. But I guess in Minnesota, they say duck, duck, gray duck. So that's what inspired this sock to have this duck pattern and has the one gray duck. One of the things that's really interesting about this pattern as well is that, okay, there we go. Is here you can see the ducks a little bit better here. Let's see the gray duck. What's interesting about this pattern is the ducks, those are created with intarsia. So one thing about knitting in the round and intarsia is a lot of
times you're simply told it can't be done. And that's not exactly true. It can be done. You can knit intarsia in the round projects, but it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. There's various techniques to do it. I'm not sure exactly what technique she uses in her pattern because I haven't read the actual pattern. But remember how I said, like, sometimes you can be knitting in the round and turn the work and be knitting on the wrong side? I was specifically thinking about intarsia. There is a way of doing intarsia in the round where you knit across, you know, and then when you get to the other side, you do a yarn over, you turn, and then you knit back around on the wrong side. And so you really are knitting a row in that sense. And then you do the yarn over and the knit two together and you close it up. It's kind of actually really like doing a short row in the round when you use that type of technique to do intarsia in the round. So I don't know if that's what she's doing to make that happen. I don't know. But it's very interesting to me that she uses intarsia in the round to do that pattern. It is an unusual choice. But it's cool.
It's cool because I think it's something a lot of times designers avoid for understandable reasons, but it's really fun when you come across sock patterns that do use some kind of technique to do that. Oh, and it features a strong heel, by the way, this sock. I'm showing this off because this sock does feature yarn heel, and right here I have a video on the strong heel. So if you're interested in learning how to do the strong heel, you can check out that link. I will put a link for that in the description box after I'm done with the live stream. Okay, next. I think this is the last new pattern for the week. And that is Victoria Marchant's knits Tiger Cowl. Now, if you are a regular viewer, you might be like, Carrie, didn't we already look at this? Yes, I screwed up with Fiber Happenings, and I put this up on Fiber Happenings too soon. I didn't read her submission carefully enough. That was on me. But this pattern is now up, and it is another stranded colorwork pattern, and it is so cool. I think this is one of the, like, you know, the one thing about stranded colorwork is that often, we're going to stay here. Oftentimes with intarsia or stranded colorwork, you're dealing with very traditional motifs. A lot of times the motifs are based either from Fair Isle knitting or Scandinavian knitting. Scandinavian Fair Isle knitting tends to be a lot more of, like, you know, the deers and the more geometric, like, animals and things of that nature in the motifs. And this is a stranded colorwork technique, or a stranded colorwork pattern that really is just its own thing. It's not drawing off of traditional pattern work, and I just think it's so cool. I'm totally down with her choice of green and purple, teal and purple, because I am a child of the 80s and 90s, and like the 80s person in me goes, yes, green and purple. So I love that. One thing about this pattern that to be aware of, just looking at it, is this pattern is going to have some longer, although not too long, looking at it, this will though have some longer strands of yarn in it. So you're gonna have to be like comfortable with doing float captures if you do this pattern. Capturing your floats is really not a complicated thing at all, but it's just one of those, if you're going to do stranded color work, it is something you have to be comfortable with. So, but this is her latest pattern. It's so cool. I just think it's so cool. And is that the last? Yes, that's the last new pattern. So I'm going to close that. And we're going to look at a couple of designers real quick. This is going to be quick because we are
running towards the end of our time together. But I have 2 new designers on the Fiber Indie list, so I wanted to give them both a shout out. One is Maddie Harvey Designs. She's a designer from Edinburgh. And I love her work. I mean, I love all the work of all the designers on the Fiber Indie list, but her work just speaks to me in that special, oh my gosh, there's an explosion of color way, because I love color. She has a number of patterns that are stranded color work, I've expected, but she also has quite a number of patterns utilizing slip stitch techniques that create just amazing texture, and I want to highlight this pattern in particular. This is her Winter Lights shawl, and oh, it would help if I shared the screen with you.
Forgot to share. There we go. This is her Winter Lights shawl, and I love this pattern. These long lines of the variegated blue-green yarn on the black background, I believe, are being created through slip stitch techniques, and it's just so cool. It's just such a great combination of color and texture and doing it in a unexpected way. I think it's so cool. I love this pattern. So I wanted to highlight that one in particular. And again, it is Maddie. Just like, so cool. We'll click back. Maddie Harvey Designs. And she has a pay hip store. You can find her on the Knitting Indie list. And I will put a link down to her pay hip store in the description box after we are done. I gotta start writing down these links I'm planning to put down there. I'm always worried I'm gonna forget one. The other designer I wanted to highlight today is the Transatlantic Crochet. We have another crochet designer on the list. Yes, crochet is the new sexy. She has an Etsy store. I actually met her on a Fiber, like one of the Fiber Facebook groups that I'm in. And she's a crochet designer, and a lot of her work is actually inspired by being into cosplay. And I wanted to highlight this pattern in particular because I just think this is so cool. As a kid, I loved the cartoon Scooby-Doo, and she has, come on, load. She has a pattern that is the Daphne dress from Scooby-Doo. And I'm like, oh my god. I just think that is so, so cool. So cool. So yeah, that's Transatlantic Crochet. She's now on the Fiber Indie list. I look forward to seeing more of her fun, her fun work. I'm running out of steam. I'm running out of steam. I'm sorry.
Done it again. Clicked on the wrong thing again. There we go. So that is everything in Pattern Spotlight. Like I said, it was a big Pattern Spotlight this week. Big. We had like 4 or 5 new patterns, 2 new designers on the Fiber Indie list. Speaking of the Fiber Indie list, it's now been up for I think 8 or 9 months, which blows my mind. And fiber happenings, I've been doing that now for a while. And I on my Buy Me a Coffee, link down in the description box if you'd like to leave me a tip. On my Buy Me a Coffee, I recently put a post up about kind of where the Fiber Indie List and the Fiber Happenings are at. And I'm still maintaining the Fiber Indie List, like I'm still hosting that, still going to exist. But I always had the Fiber Indie List as sort of a stopgap thing to do after everything that happened with Ravelry, because I'm not speaking very clearly. After everything that happened with Ravelry, a lot of designers were scrambling to set up places to sell their work off of Ravelry. But there was no like centralized sort of place to find them. So that's how the Fiber Indie List came about, was like, I'll just put together a list. I'll put together a directory. So if people want it, they have it. But I'm not a web development person. My skills are limited, and I always knew that I wasn't going to be able to create the functionality with it that would be ideal, namely a database. Like I wouldn't know how to create a back-end database that then connects to something on the front end that looks pretty. But there is now the Yarn database, and I'm much more functional than the Fiber Indie List. And I'm going to continue maintaining the Fiber Indie List, but I also know that it's never going to be like a replacement. More of my focus now is on Fiber Happenings, because I feel like I can, through that page and through this space on my live stream, promote these designers who are working off Rav. So I'm still maintaining it. And on my Buy Me a Coffee, I have a new goal, which is to fund my website for another year, because in about 3 or 4 months, my membership plan on the website that I use to house my website is going to be up, and I'm going to have to repurchase my domain name and all of that. And it's not the most wildly expensive thing in the world, but it is an expense. So that is my new goal on my Buy Me a Coffee, is to fund the website for another year. So if you would like to leave me a tip, you can always buy me a coffee, and that is what those tips are going to be saved up for, which is to fund the website for another year. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And something to know is, yes, I do utilize affiliate links. And I've gotten some commissions off of it, and it's been great. Those commissions helped me buy my camera, so I could have a better camera during live stream. Still trying to work out the other technical stuff, but we'll get there. But the truth is, the tips have been the area that has really funded the website the most. Like, that's where I've really had the most. I'm trying to think of a way to say this doesn't sound like crass, but that's been the funding source that has helped support the website the most, has been the tips. So if you'd like to help me with that, it would be greatly appreciated. And I always am like, oh, I hate doing these, but it's part of the deal. I have to. So thank you for bearing with my little uncomfortable sales pitch. So I think that's everything we got for today. I did my uncomfortable sales pitch. My cheeky plug. And we've done Pattern Spotlight. So coming up for the week, I should have a new video upload this coming Friday. Is going to be for In the Round Knitting. Maybe you've noticed a pattern in my uploads lately where I have been doing quite a bit with In the Round Knitting. Never really said this out loud, but I have kind of been focusing on that this year so far, at least for the first half of year, of having some videos on In the Round Knitting tips and tricks. And I'm very excited about this one because I'm sharing with you my nearly foolproof way of avoiding twists when joining in the round. So I'm very excited for this video. And that should be coming up this Friday, assuming I have time to edit. Yeah, this past week was crazy. Something else is coming up soon. I haven't shot it yet, but it is coming soon. But I did finish my fingerless glove using the 9-inch circular. Here's the glove. The ends need to be woven in, but I did finish it. And yeah, it's really, I actually really like this glove. It's just, it was very simple. I am working on the partner using the magic loop with my 24-inch Chiagu fixed needle. And so that review is coming. That review is coming of my 9-inch Chiagu interchangeable needle. So I have thoughts. I have opinions. I am looking forward to sharing them with you. And what else? Oh, and also video that's going to be coming up in the next, hopefully, few weeks. We'll see when it goes up, is me doing 5 uses for scrap yarn. Which is going to include how to use your scrap yarn as a row counter. So that video will also be coming up in the next like month and a half or so. So yes, that is what is going on with the channel right now. Most likely there will not be a live stream next weekend because I will have to be shooting and editing. I think we have found the routine that's going to be coming up while I continue working full-time on my job. If you don't know, last month, beginning of March, I started a full-time job. What I do for a living, or have done for a living, most of my adult life is work in reality television, and I started a new show beginning of March, which is why I haven't been able to upload as much as I had to been the past year, because life is happening. But so basically the schedule is like me uploading every other Friday and then every other Sunday having a Knit Tea live. So each week I still am having content on the website or on the YouTube channel, but it's just what type of content that is getting switched up a little bit. One thing though, and I decided this today, I've been thinking about doing this for a while, is I'm going to be moving the start time for Knit Tea Live to noon. I have liked having it 11 for many reasons, but it's just not realistic. For me, 12 is going to be a better time life-wise for me to do my Knit Tea Lives than 11. I just need the extra hour to make sure I get everything set up and I'm not rushing at the last minute, and you know, it's just is what it is. So I hope that you will follow me as I move that time up an hour, but yeah, it's just what's going to be necessary to keep this going, because I love doing the live stream. I love doing it with all y'all. And if there's anything that you ever want to talk about on live stream, on Knit Tea Live, tweet me, get into my mentions on Twitter, or, you know, you can contact me through Instagram. I would love to hear what you would like to talk about during Knit Tea Live, because it's always more fun when it's a topic you're interested in. So yes, Bear. Oh, thank you, Bear. She says, I'm hopeful that I will be able to catch you more often at the new time. Yes, I hope so. But of course, if you can't be here for the live stream itself, you can always watch on replay and comment and still be part of the conversation. Always, always, always. So I think that is everything for today. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for finding the live stream restart and all of that craziness. I am going to figure out how to have live streams that start well from the beginning. Like, let's not do this, keep having to do it this way. All right. So again, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you have, oh, you know what? I do this every time. I was like, oh, wait, let me set up something first before I go into my final spiel. There we go. All right. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. I hope you have a great week ahead. And as always, happy health and happy knitting. Bye.